As a forever DM, I have had my fair share of players surprising me while I'm behind the screen with clever uses of spells to change and challenge the current narrative of the campaign. Personally, whenever someone does this, I love it. I mean, I hate it. I definitely hate it, but I also love it, you know? So today I thought I would highlight some of the most powerful spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that don't just spit out insane fireball damage, but rather that will totally throw your Dungeon Master for a loop and completely ruin their plans. Because, you know, it's all in good fun, right? The very first 5e spell on our list today is the meager level 2 spell, Locate Object. I want to give a quick shout out to my boy Mike for bringing this to my attention after having a clever and frankly hilarious use for tracking and hiding from the big bad evil guy. While Mike has been part of my Patreon campaign in the past, thankfully, this is something he and his group did to a different Dungeon Master. So the trick is simple. Locate Object does exactly what you think it does. It checks out to a decent size range of about 1,000 feet, and it tells you where an item is and what direction it is heading if it starts to move. Well, in this case, the DM had a big bad that the players had met before who was very vain. So when the party was trying to hunt down the big bad in a castle, playing cat and mouse back and forth, they simply used Locate Object on the beautiful and very distinctive boots worn by the villain. Pretty damn funny, and if I was the DM, I'd have no response but to laugh it off and give my players some kudos for the creative use of a rather mundane spell. Also, I would personally nullify any advantages an invisible foe had if my players did this, because I often bend the rules in my players' favor if they impress me with really great creativity like that. So, pay attention to how the DM describes their villains and try locating object on a sword, scabbard, distinctive earring, or fancy hat to track them. And while the spell isn't on the sword list, if you happen to be multi-classing, consider trying Distant Spell to double the spell's range and hunt down a hiding NPC in a large city with now a 4,000-foot diameter circle that moves with you. Next up, we're moving a little higher with the 5th level spell, Dream. Oh man, when it comes to strictly creative spells, this might be the most powerful spell in the game. So here's the skinny. It lets you or a messenger invade someone's dreams. And not just invade their dreams, but to shape them and converse with the person. Oh, and that person will remember everything that happened in their dreams. Now, here's the kicker. You can use this against enemies to deal psychic damage to them and prevent them from resting and healing up. But that's not how we want to use this at all. Instead, we want to use this to manipulate our enemies. Enemies who might already have, say, delusions of grandeur, maybe. Enemies that think they are the chosen ones, maybe to bring back Tiamat to the material plane or believe they are serving a higher power. What if you contacted the big bad evil guy every night in his dreams, pretending to be a messenger of some dark god, only to have him show up exactly when and where you want, having set a trap of the entire king's army waiting in the other room? Sorry, Dungeon Master, but the big bad evil guy is now convinced we are his god, or a representative of one. The thing is, this spell has a wisdom save, but that part of the spell is only if you choose to attack the dreamer psychically. If you just want to appear as a messenger, so to speak, go nuts. Even if your DM rules, they get to make a save for the initial night. Once you show up, make their dreams filled with sweet, enticing images of them sitting on the throne as emperor of all the land, and tell them you will deliver more messages and instructions tomorrow. Odds are they're not going to fight it. So use dreams to manipulate literally anyone, kings, Zentarum agents, dragons, and ruin all of your Dungeon Master's plans. Speaking of getting the big bad to go exactly where you want, next up we have a level 2 spell that will force them to stay where you want with Immovable Object. 1 action casting time, touch an object that weighs 10 pounds or less, and lock that bad boy in place with 0, again that's 0 concentration. While it's true, you can't target most armors in the game as they almost all weigh more than 10 pounds. You can target things like opponents' swords, their pants, or their shoe. And if they have to make a strength check to move that item against your spell DC, just to move it 10 feet, and thus they spend their entire precious action to do just that. And this isn't sovereign glue. It doesn't need a surface to stick to or time for it to set up. This is more along the lines of the immovable rod. So feel free to have the barb knock them prone and follow it up by casting this spell with an arrow in your hand to just pin your opponent straight to the ground. But that's not all. We can be even more creative because you get to upcast this thing. So imagine for a moment, your Dungeon Master has the main campaign MacGuffin, the one ring to rule them all, if you will. And the party Graviturgy Wizard runs up to the item and locks it in place permanently. Oh yeah, and in addition to the permanent effect from the level 6 spell slot, it also increases the strength to move 10 feet at a time now to your DC plus 10. So probably like a 23, 24, or 25 strength check every 10 feet they want to move this item. Who needs to destroy the Ring of Power when you can just lock it in place and make it virtually unusable? And now you get to watch your DM's face as they realize their main campaign motivation has been nullified until dispelled somehow. And I'm sure you guys out there can come up with a million ways to abuse this just like you would with a much more expensive and rare removable rod. So be sure to share with the rest of the class today all those devious methods down in the comments section. Speaking of shenanigans with MacGuffins and level 6 spell slots, we can't leave off instant summons either. I've had players do such incredibly clever things to break the campaign with this spell. 1 minute cast, permanent effect, no concentration, and you get to mark a 10-pound item with an invisible symbol. A single action. Later, that literally any time you can just poof the item and it's back right in your hand. Now, a couple of small drawbacks for this thing. This is going to eat 1,000 gold piece sapphire first off. And if the item is currently being held, you only get the name of the individual and their location. But clever players will 100% find ways around this little hiccup. I mean, with the exception of some jewelry, whatever an item is, say an enchanted sword or a magic jug, there will be times where the owner has to eat, sleep, or bathe themselves, which is where scrying and arcane eye come into place. But sure, the 1,000 gold requirement is expensive, unless of course you've sold something recently to a vendor for, 2,000 gold and poof it back. Has the big bad taken your sister hostage and demands you trade her life for the dragon scepter your party just recovered? No problem. Go get that sis and wait for the right moment when you're both safe across the continent to snatch it right back. Talk about ruining your DM's plans. I mean, even though the DM will obviously know what's going on from your end, I think I'd be forced to play my villain as oblivious to said recovery plot and just be fair to my players and kind of realistic. Imagine the look on a king's face when you recover their crown jewels, only to have them ripped back again once you make your way south. You just need to wait for that right moment for the king to take it off to sleep, whatever, which makes this a very, very abusable and pretty funny spell in the game. Counterspell. I don't think it's any stretch to say that most Dungeon Masters find running spellcasters a lot of fun, particularly when we use them as boss fights. We don't get to play with cool abilities like you players do often, and when we see level 5, 6, and 7 spell slots in our stat blocks, it's exciting, and we definitely enjoy planning out how we might engage a fight with the players with said spells. But yeah, when we suddenly run our awesome Dark Mage up against a group of PCs and 2 of them happen to have Counterspell to lock down all the fun magic we were looking forward to slinging, it can definitely ruin our plans due to how Counterspell works against the spell's level and isn't a contested skill check against our boss's higher DC. And don't get me started on how many times I've seen a mage roll poorly for initiative, try to cast one spell, get hammered by the party, and right when I decide the boss will attempt to teleport away, Counterspell, which leads to a dead major campaign villain and pretty much cancels any future plans I might have had for them. Remove Curse. So much for that plot line, right? A simple level 3 spell and whammo. Too bad, so sad, Dungeon Master. The definition of a spell that will ruin your DM's plans. Identify, for that matter. Okay, so this is another spell that turns players' dungeon delves into a nope, we win Gone are the days of giving players items and letting them try to use them without knowing the full effects. It's not that your old DM from 2E AD&D wasn't going to give you guys all the details eventually, guys. It's just that they may have wanted some roleplay opportunity without all the answers just handed to you on a silver platter, but Identify just stone cold stops players from trying out items on their own, and it will even give them the exact charges remaining. Certainly a spell that might, and well, it's going to ruin your DM's plans. Conjure Woodland Beings. This is a spell for which I've made literally an entire video on before, and frankly, it's incredibly broken. If you want to see the full combo for how to use this, check out that video, link down below as well. But the short version is that it lets a level 8 group of adventurers turn any campaign into a Jurassic Park movie. And even though it might ruin my plans, it's so hilarious that I had to include it in this list. Galder's Speedy Courier. This is a spell from the Lost Library of Kowalsh that is admittedly incredibly niche, but it is a wizard spell, so if you can get your hand on it and get it into a spell book, preparing it for the day isn't the biggest deal. This spell lets you, as an action, mind you, bamf away any item that can fit in a 3-foot chest instantaneously to any person on the same plane of existence as you. And so, if you happen to catch up with a big bad evil guy and want to get that evil cringe Shinobon or other terrible story MacGuffin away from him immediately, throw it in a chest and send it to the King's Wizard who you've been working with across the globe. See a crystal that a group of hags are drawing power from and find out it's too hard to attack and destroy, snatch it up off the altar and bamf it right out of that combat to any NPC who you've made an ally with. And I'm sure you can imagine all the shenanigan heists you could pull off with a few minutes of invisibility at a party where you might get searched on the way out. Bamf, it's out of there. Oh, and if you just so happen to be tasked with negotiating with a dragon who happens to be nesting with some eggs nearby and the party wants to turn up the heat, so to speak, or perhaps protect themselves during said negotiation, well, go snatch you a dragon egg. For the record, since we never get an official dragon egg size in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I like to use real-life dinosaurs as a reference, and their eggs are so much smaller than you would think. Even with a 3-foot dragon egg, you're going to be able to at least take one. And oh yeah, and Tay-Tay, when you watch this, sorry amigo, you should have taken Speedy or Courier and maybe your dragon egg wouldn't have gotten crushed in the castle's collapse. Sorry, bud. Next up, we have one of the strongest spells in the game with the 8th level spell, Glibness. This spell is probably the single most dangerous role-playing spell in the game. Basically, it's a spell that lets you lie your ass off, and I mean that. The strength with the spell is not the automatic 15 charisma checks. No, my friends. The campaign-wrecking, DM plan-ruining effect is that you can now lie in a zone of truth. I think it is very reasonable to say that most wise kings would have arcane assistants and advisors. And I think that by that same token, when someone comes to said king with shocking news that might implicate, say, a war with a neighboring kingdom, the first thing that the king would want to do is get some proof. And that questioning of the newsbringer might be done while within a zone of truth from said magical advisor. Well, with this spell, all you need as a player is to get in front of someone powerful enough with the right story, and you can create your very own Game of Thrones across the entire continent. As far as how this will ruin your Dungeon Master's plans, well, I think you guys can come up with plenty of scenarios with a good old-fashioned lie that now can no longer be magically determined to be anything but the absolute gospel. And finally, a few more spells that I felt like could be kind of honorable mentions here without making the video, I don't know, 30 minutes long. We have Zone of Truth. Great spell that can throw the DM by surprise with their NPCs suddenly being unable to lie to the party. It will ruin your DM's plans. Sequester, which needs a willing creature before it can imprison them, but that can also be aided by things like suggestion and hell, a great lie with glibness, for example. Distort value, which is honestly hilarious, but obnoxious as a DM who finds all the party wants to do is rip off an entire market district. And yes, speak with animals, not because it will ruin my plans, But as a DM who roleplays most dialogues, I've definitely given up on roleplay as a chipmunk and now just tell my players whatever the hell information they are trying to figure out by talking to rodents in the forest. What was that, like 14 spells, 13 spells in total, something like that? You guys should now be armed to wreak havoc to your Dungeon Masters D&D campaigns. And so for that, you guys are welcome. DMs, sorry, not sorry. So now I want to ask you guys out there, what's that one spell? What's that one scenario? What's that one thing that you guys are so proud of because you ruined all of our Dungeon Masters hours and hours and hours and freaking hours of planning just for you guys to come in with a wrecking ball and throw the campaign totally to the left? I want to know down below. Love to hear those stories because, yeah, I sympathize with all of my fellow DMs out there. And DMs, if you guys have stories where players have done something that just ruined everything, let me know. I will be reading those things. I, of course, want to give a massive thank you to all the incredible supporters out there over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, thank you so much for all your support. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to my family. And because of you guys, I get to keep doing this. So thank you. If you guys like what I do here, you want to support more content and snag some rewards for yourself, like jumping in a one-on-one coaching session with me or snagging some new maps, welcomeadventures.com is a great way to help out the channel. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on DM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more, so if this sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.